really had a place between the two, but I never quite placed where.
No, when you first came in today, I had a consent on this.
Yes, we don't say. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Sorry.
May like to learn from
Good to see you. Fiona told me most likely you're going to see Fabio.
Well, I'm going to chair this second session.
Yes, we're a small but select few, I think, here. My name is, so we'll start now. And our mic doesn't seem to be working, so I'll have to just speak. Can you speak up when you translate? Yeah. Okay. So my name's Alison Doig. I work for Christian Aid. And 10 years ago, I went to Johannesburg to the WSSD, and actually I worked there for Practical Action, and we took a campaign for energy access to Johannesburg. And I recently found the paper, the briefing that I took there, and I'm sure it's exactly the same issues we'll be needing on finance, technology, local communities, ownership. I'm sure all the issues will be much the same. But I think the difference this time round is that 10 years ago, energy was slightly on the margins of the main discussion. It was not in the political text, it was not being discussed by politicians except one or two maybe. The Germans had renewable energy 2004 conference, for example, as a result of Joburg, but no major political step. This year, for Rio Plus 20, this year is the year of sustainable energy for all. We have a political opportunity to get energy and access to energy, particularly right on the political map, and we get commitments globally. But that's not going to work unless that energy gets to poor people. If we don't, universal access is how do we get the energy that poor people need to them, and that's what this session is very much about, the real, practical, innovative solutions for energy so that poor people can get that energy. So we have a short time. We will slightly run over because we started slightly late, so we'll have a quick switch over. This is in 2 sessions. This one's people's very practical experiences. The next session is a bit more question-answer session and looking at sort of principles of how we can get energy to poor people. So we'll run for about 55 minutes and then have a quick second switch over, 5-minute break, and start the next session. So we have a little time, and I think we'll just move on to our first speaker to hear some real practical experience of innovative energy delivery models. So we'll start with Neil Jeffery from Renewable World, which is, I've just been told, international charity of the energy sector.
Of the renewable
energy sector.
Well, you certainly don't want to know. Great. Thank you so much, Alison. Appreciate that introduction. Do let me know if you can't hear me at the back. So, as Alison said, Renewable World is the charity of the renewable energy sector. We work with more than 60 renewable energy companies globally and are supported by various major renewable energy associations. We work specifically with some of the poorest in the world, so the unserved and the underserved poor populations in terms of energy provision. Working in areas of market failure, so where a commercial response is not able to provide energy because consumers simply wouldn't be able to pay the price point for commercial investment. We see here the barriers are so acute to successful economic activity that sometimes it's virtually impossible. And it's in these situations that energy is a critical factor that is required for poverty alleviation. Today I'm going to discuss with you one particular case in an area of multiple market failure. I'm an extremely isolated location in northern Mozambique with topographical barriers. Basic physical and electronic infrastructure is incredibly poor levels of education, weak governance, and very weak business acumen. All of this means that any business initiative in this area needs significant support and guidance. As a result, we think capacity building and upfront capital investment are absolutely critical to kickstart market activity. Our capacity building model that we work with has 6 areas: technical, strengthening governance, management and community development, business models and cash flow, sustainable impacts, and upfront capital investment, of course. Everybody needs cash to get something started. And our activities to capitalise market activity are focused very much around trying to establish market and value chain creation. So, the example I'm talking about in Mpandi is a village of nearly 1,000 people in an exceptionally isolated location, as I said. It takes at least 6 hours to get to the nearest urban area over very difficult terrain. Most of the coastal communities in the north of Mozambique are traditional fishing villages, yet in the most recent years fish stocks have dwindled significantly. As a result, the village has struggled to provide adequate food for their families, and they've been forced to seek alternatives in terms of earning an income. Attempts to grow crops have largely failed due to a lack of water, particularly in the dry season, and those crops that do survive are only suitable for home consumption. We have worked with a local partner in the area, the Clean Energy Company, to install a 1.2 kilowatt hybrid system. That's a 1 kilowatt wind turbine and 200 watt solar panel, which provides constant supply via battery banks to lift water from a newly drilled well. Following the upfront capital investment from Renewable World, the local Farmers Business Association owns and manages the system. The Farmers Association was formalised for that purpose, with considerable time spent in institutional structure building and setting up organisational processes such as elections, and specific skill sets were promoted, such as accountancy. The role of women in the Business Association was critical. The President and the Treasurer are both women and provide an excellent example to entrepreneurial women in the community. The Farmers Business Association is now able to produce crops for profit, and this has increased their income through the sales of vegetables, beans and other horticultural produce, obviously all fed from the system which is using renewable energy to lift water. The increase in food quality also significantly improves the health of the local population. You can really see the entrepreneurial skills of this particular association being put into place. They found multiple ways to try to get a profit from the excess energy. They're selling the energy to charge mobile phones. They're also running a barber shop and lighting a local shop. All of these additional businesses which run off the electricity were set up by other community members who saw the benefit brought by the electricity, and all of this activity then promotes the long-term financial sustainability of the system. So, just to wrap up, I hope I'm going to get time right. So, this example highlighted to us the needs to examine some of the issues influencing and affecting successful establishment of the ownership, management and governance of energy systems. The off-grid system, an off-grid system is only able to provide real value to its customers if it is run well, focuses on what the customers need and provides it at a price that is suitable for them. In this particular example I talked about, a cohesive unit ran the system effectively. That's a community of interest of the Farmers Business Association who shared the same ideas and ideals. And moreover, the Business Association brought together the most business-minded people in that community, but also served as an example to others in terms of what activity could look like. All of this required support, such as business modelling and cash flow predictions, and alongside the establishment of appropriate management systems and the strengthening of governance, those issues were critical. I do have a series of recommendations regarding ownership, management and governance, but let me know, should I leave that for the discussion? I think that might make sense. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, because that's the example, and then as a result of our work in other areas, we have come up with a series of recommendations around the 3 areas, but I'm happy to discuss that later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Excuse me, just for clarification, you work with for-profit companies.
We draw resources from for-profit companies in the renewable energy sector. All of our work, we're a non-profit organisation, and all of our work is to work with those consumers that are not served by the for-profit industry.
Okay, but we'll move on, and we've got Sonia Mara from MAB, which is an organisation that works with people in Brazil affected by large dams and dam-affected communities. She will talk through an interpreter. She speaks Portuguese, so please a little patience with that, and please.
Primeiramente, gostaria de dizer que nesse momento, a nível mundial, o capital está em crise e a energia está hoje no centro do capital.
I would like to say that in this moment the capital is under a crisis, economic crisis, so energy is a very important good that it is in the market.
E nessa recomposição do sistema capitalista, está se apropriando dos bens naturais.
Capitalism must now to fix itself to work, so it's going to appropriate more natural resources.
das riquezas estratégicas,
that are strategic,
da água, da energia dos territórios
like water, energy, or territory,
e da força do trabalho dos trabalhadores.
and the workers' force.
Nesse sentido, o Brasil tem um potencial hídrico de 260 megawatts.
This way, Brazil has a hydroelectric power potential that is like 250 gigawatts.
Porém, a energia, principalmente no Brasil, na América Latina, é uma mercadoria.
So in Brazil and Latin America, it is a good for sale energy,
A commodity.
a commodity.
Temos 2.000 hidrelétricas construídas,
Till now, 2,000 hydroelectric power stations has been built in Brazil.
1.500.000 famílias atingidas,
1.5 million families has been affected by this building,
pagamos a quinta energia mais cara do mundo.
and we pay the fifth more expensive bill for energy in Brazil.
70% dos atingidos não recebem nenhum tipo de indenização.
70% of affected people has not received any kind of compensation.
E 600 empresas usam 30% da energia.
And just 600 enterprises have monopolized the use of all the energy that is produced. in Brazil.
Como a energia é uma mercadoria, não tem iniciativas de governo e na América Latina para ter alternativas.
So, because it is a commodity, the government has not any initiative in order to provide energy for the population.
No Brasil, temos quase 3 milhões de famílias sem energia elétrica.
Here in Brazil, we have almost 3 million people without energy access.
E é uma das despesas maiores das famílias brasileiras.
And it's one of the most expensive fees that bills that the families face.
E nesse momento, o movimento dos atingidos por barragens está fazendo algumas alternativas junto com o Christian Aid.
In this moment, we are like a movement of dam-affected people. We are implementing some initiatives to provide energy with Christian Aid.
Como, por exemplo, os aquecedores solares que estamos fazendo no sul do Brasil.
We are implementing low-cost heating solar panels in the south of Brazil.
Reduz 25% a conta de energia elétrica das famílias.
It makes like to go down like 30% the bill of electricity in the families.
Aumenta a renda familiar
It increases the income for the families.
e também debate a questão da organização das famílias.
At the same time that we can debate inside the movement the organization issue for the communities.
É essas experiências que está sendo
And
mostrada.
they are being sold there.
E aumenta principalmente o conforto das famílias que não têm energia elétrica.
So we can make life easy for these families that don't have access to energy.
Promove a autonomia energética e também a prevenção ambiental.
We promote energy autonomy, energetic autonomy for these areas, and at the same time e ao mesmo tempo também a contribuir para o environment.
Então, nesse momento, nós queremos, com essa experiência, mostrar à sociedade brasileira e ao governo que a energia precisa ser um bem comum da humanidade.
So we want to show through this experience, not just to the government, but as well to the civil society in Brazil, that energy it is a common good. It is not a commodity.
E que para isso nós precisamos pensar um projeto popular pensando nas alternativas.
So we have to build a popular project thinking about alternatives
Baseado na solidariedade,
that is based on solidarity,
na soberania
sovereignty,
e no controle social.
and social control.
E nós queremos fazer dessa experiência das placas solares com a Christian Aid
And we want to do from this experience about the solar panel,
popularizar na sociedade brasileira.
we want to make like a popular alternative together with Christian Aid,
Principalmente nas áreas dos atingidos por barragens,
mainly in the areas of dam affected people.
que são mais de 1.500.000 famílias.
That are more than 1.5 million people.
E está planejado para o próximo período no Brasil mais 1.500 hidrelétricas.
And we have a prevision for the next period in Brazil to be built 1,500 new hydroelectric power stations.
Sabendo que a energia mais barata, a hídrica,
And it is the cheaper energy to produce.
porém a população não tem acesso.
But the population has not access.
Então as alternativas vêm para fazer o debate do modelo energético,
So these alternatives are as well to make an energetic debate
e popularizar o debate de que existem alternativas e que os trabalhadores podem fazer isso.
and to make to think about that these energy alternatives has to be implemented for the population and population has to appropriate. It is not just like enterprise, but the people who can.
Levando em consideração que o Brasil hoje tem 190 milhões de habitantes, então nosso trabalho vai ser muito grande.
And we have to think about that we have almost 200 million people in Brazil, so we have a big work.
Água e energia não são mercadorias.
And food and energy are not commodities.
Deve estar a serviço dos trabalhadores e das trabalhadoras.
Must be serving workers and.
Graças. Thank you. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Sonia Mara. So it's interesting, we've got a few themes coming through here. We heard earlier from Neil about the very much importance about local ownership and management and government. And I think in your one also it was about affordability and accessibility. It's energy for who, not just energy, but energy for who, and making sure that it is for all. And I think that's a hugely important part. So we'll move on to Ecomatzer from Hivos in the Netherlands. Yeah.
We'll just go standing, because I find it difficult to sit down and talk to you.
And I will do.
Okay, yeah, I will just sit. I want to talk about this nice island of Sumba, but let me first introduce myself, my organization. And for your use, I have also made a slide show with the notes on it, but you can have that later from the IAD organization. So this is just giving you some pictures. So the second one, please. So HIVOS is a Dutch organization giving grants to civil society organizations in southern countries, so to say, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. We work on several themes like human rights, but also ICT and media and culture and arts. But one part is also economic development, and economic development includes access to energy. So we have quite some projects on micro-hydro, on improved cook stoves, on biogas, and there are quite some good results from that. But in the end what we see is that the speed that it's going is far too slow. We're not going to achieve meaningful result to give all people worldwide access to energy. So that's the reason why we were thinking how to improve the speed of that kind of energy access. Next one, please. That's why we developed the Iconic Island Initiative. And the idea behind the Iconic Island Initiative is that we need, not as HIVOS, but generally all who are working on access to energy, a kind of good story to tell the people, to get more people informed about access to energy, about the problem, but also about the solutions. So we thought if we want to make it visible, it should be something that you can understand and can hold to. And we thought an island can be something that you can understand as an audience. So we have chosen an island to work on, and on that island to showcase first of all the problems, because people without energy have a big problem. And secondly, how you can solve the problem. And the idea behind this initiative is not that Hivos itself is going to do the work. We think it should be done together with other stakeholders, private sector, government, as at least what we are doing as Hivos is only addressing a part of the problem. And to do that properly, thank you, yes. It's not a good idea to have a plan ready when you start. It should be something which is open for everybody, so it should not be set in stone yet. So what we basically have done is setting the ambition and not making a plan. We've said, okay, we have the island, we want to make it 100% renewable energy powered. And that's the ambition, and we invite others to join us. And we have the next slide. And we have chosen this island Sumba. On this huge map, it's a very small island, but in reality it's quite big. It has 600,000 people living on the island, and it's quite a huge area. We have chosen for this island because it's a very poor island, and of course our objective as a development organization is not so much to do on energy, but to use energy access as a means to development. And this island is very poor. It's one of the poorest islands in Indonesia. I think it's 1/4 of the income is a quarter of the average income in Indonesia. So it's really poor, and lots of people don't have any form of access to energy. 70% of the people don't have electricity, they just rely on firewood and on, in the dark, they have just kerosene lights in the evening. It's mainly dark in the evening.
How many people?
650,000.
700.
700.
700,000.
Okay.
Almost.
Calculations. Yes. We also choose for this island because the government there is already engaged in renewable energy thinking, and it's quite easy to reach there, relatively easy to reach. Because if you have an iconic island which you want to use as a showcase, it should be an island where you can go and invite people to see it. Okay, next one. I think. Still have time? Okay, then I want to say something about the results. First of all, we have some very practical results. Here you see a micro hydro installation built by Ibeka with the villages of Sumba. But I think it's more important here to talk about the process results. We have started like 2 years ago, and first goal was to get the people from Sumba, the local leaders, but also the Indonesian government involved in this process and to get their views and finally also their support. They now very much support the idea. They have all signed an MOU to support the ambition to move the whole island to 100% renewable energy island. And we're now working on a roadmap by the government to implement this whole idea. So we were quite happy that we got that kind of support from all kind of stakeholders. We also invited the private sector. And we were very happy to see that some of the Indonesian corporates were already supporting this kind of initiatives from a CSR point of view. But even more important, as one of the leading companies in Indonesia who's providing now fossil fuel-based electricity plants. And they have seen that in the end Indonesia have to change to renewables. And they say we want to use this island as well as our starting point of a change to renewable energy. And they have agreed to start building a huge windmill to power the grid on the island from wind energy. Yeah, I think then the next slide, to an end. Next, I try to see that I missed my slides. Okay, no, I didn't miss anything. I think this is not something we can solve easily. It's a long-term process. We need to involve the corporations, we need to involve the people, we need to involve the Indonesian government. We have said we want to do it in 10 to 15 years, but we're still in the process of achieving it. And in this process we want to match our ideas, or ideas of the different players in this approach, to the big funds. For example, the Asian Development Bank has a lot of money for renewable energy, but the amount of money is so big you cannot use it. They only start thinking about 100 or 200 million euros or dollars. So the problem is, how can you propose something that they can fund? And we are very happy that now the EDB has said, okay, we want to support this initiative, not because we want to put all our money in this island, no, because we want to develop a kind of approach that will be used on many islands, and then you can use the big funds of the EDB for access to energy. So the whole idea now is to develop solutions and match them to big funding and match them to solutions to move forward. And we're also looking for more engagement of different parties, different organizations, different ideas to engage in the island and to have other people supporting this.
So you're packaging projects for the big funding rather than changing the funding?
Yes, but I think in the end it will help.
Move it the other way?
Yes, move it the other way. You're starting from below and trying to change it from that side. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We have signed.
Thank you. And I just, again, a few things. I like your point that it is energy as a means for development rather than energy as an end itself. Your multi-stakeholder process is obviously key, and then the appropriate finance. Finance is one thing, but appropriate finance actually is what is needed. So I think that's a really useful example. We'll move on now to Helen Marsh. Helen is Head of Global Advocacy at Practical Action, and Practical Action have, how many decades? 4 decades, yeah, of working in rural energy access in a number of countries across the globe. So.
Thanks, Alison. Back in 2010, Practical Action launched our first edition of the Poor People's Energy Outlook. Why did we do that? We did that because we recognised that the way in which energy access is provided and delivered for those who need it is fractured and incoherent. And instead we wanted to paint a more textured picture of what energy access and energy poverty actually looks like, connecting up people with policy. The Poor People's Energy Outlook introduced 2 main concepts. One is total energy access, and the other is energy access ecosystems. We're going to have our first slide, please. It's okay, we'll get to the first slide in a minute. But I wanted to explain a little bit about what we mean by total energy access. Basically, the concept of total energy access encourages practitioners and policymakers to think differently about the delivery and the definition of energy access. We're coming from the perspective that for a community or a family to be considered as having energy access, then they need to be able to use a minimum standard of the energy services they need for their well-being. So they need to be able to access enough in terms of lighting, cooking, water heating, space heating, nudge me if I could answer, cooling, information and communications, and energy for earning a living. Now, we wanted to test this concept in practice, so we established what we called our minimum standards indicators, and we're putting those into practice across a number of countries worldwide. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yep, so that's total energy access. There's a bit of information there. If you move on to the next slide, that's our concept of energy access ecosystems. And that's, we put this forward in recognition that a healthy energy access ecosystem needs to bring together a variety of actors, technologies and finance flows. We're looking to see a step change in national energy systems from weak and thin systems with few actors, little innovation and little dynamism to much stronger, dynamic, inclusive and sustainable systems. And we do that because we believe that the health of an energy access ecosystem can be both better understood and improved by looking at 3 key issues. The first is policy, the second is financing, and the third is capacity. Our thesis really is that where energy access ecosystems are strengthened, then we should be seeing an enhanced and improved delivery of energy access. And we've been spending the past 18 months or so testing that thesis out. As part of the research that we do for our annual Poor People's Energy Outlook, we work with communities across Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia to test, refine and challenge these concepts of total energy access and energy access ecosystems. But as our name suggests, we like to put these concepts into practice, and I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes sharing with you some of the lessons that we've learned from our work in Malawi, looking to assess the energy access ecosystem there and ultimately to try and improve it for poor communities. Practical Action's been working in Malawi for a number of years. We've been building successful relationships with key stakeholders and successfully delivering small-scale energy systems with local communities. But why did we choose Malawi? If you could move on to the next slide, please. Malawi was selected as our pilot program area for three main reasons. Energy access rates in Malawi are remarkably low. 85% of the population of Malawi live in rural areas, and just 1% of those have access to electricity. Therefore, the market for quality and affordable energy products is significant. Secondly, we selected Malawi because there's a real need and significant appetite for a more coordinated approach to energy access delivery, bringing together civil society, private sector, national governments and donors. And lastly, because the Malawian government's current focus on grid extension as the main means of increasing energy access to marginalised communities needs to be challenged and supplemented. And that's ever more the case when we read that in the latest version of the World Energy Outlook, that to deliver universal energy access by 2030, it's going to require 55% of the investment being in decentralised and off-grid solutions. We specifically chose to look at a district called Mulanji, again for a number of reasons. It's the most highly and densely populated area in Malawi, but with very little grid connectivity. It has huge microhydro potential. There's surveyed results of 16.5 gigawatts per annum, which could serve hundreds of communities, and it has strong potential in terms of economic development and good transport links. So over the past 12 months, we've been working with key government agencies, donors, both in terms of bilaterals and multilaterals, business leaders, SMEs, community groups, and civil society to establish what we call an energy access ecosystems assessment in Malawi. And that assessment, as I pointed to earlier, explores three key areas: financing, policy, and capacity. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at financing, this includes work on private sector investment per capita, carbon financing availability per capita, and donor and national government investment per capita. Next slide, please. On policy, we're looking at things as diverse as the positioning of energy access in the Malawian poverty reduction strategy paper, the index which assesses the ease of doing business in country, and the index that assesses corruption perception in country. And next slide, please. On capacity, that could be looking at the number of firms and NGOs active on energy access in a given country, the extent of innovative practice, and the opportunities for training and capacity development. Okay, we'll wrap up. So what does the assessment tell us, and how does it help us to ensure that we create more viable and meaningful systems in Malawi? There are three top-line findings. One, that the regulatory framework in Malawi is actually relatively sound, and there are significant opportunities to engage. Secondly, the energy access situation for poor communities is dire and worsening. And that means that there's not only an opportunity to transition towards modern energy access, but also somewhat of an obligation to ensure that we reduce unit cost, improve access, and move away from dependence on biomass. And thirdly, that the full range of benefits of electrification are not being realised at household, community, and enterprise level, largely because people don't have access to the range of affordable and efficient energy technologies they need. I'll wrap up very quickly, but just to say, this assessment and this approach has enabled Practical Action for the very first time to develop a programme in Malawi that we feel addresses and recognises the policy, capacity and finance constraints, and ensures that we're not only looking at delivering energy access improvements for 3,400 families, but we're also using the total energy approach, looking at the needs in terms of community service and enterprise. And it also means that I'll wrap up now. One last thing to the people in the room. This time of year is when Practical Action starts looking at the next edition of the Poor People's Energy Outlook, and I'd encourage any and all of you to get engaged with working with us on that. It's a way of us working towards energy frameworks and energy indicators that really measure what matter to poor communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Sorry, we're limited time, and I think the critical factor that often multilaterals think you give finance and you will get energy in there as an output, and what you're very clearly showing is that there's a whole set of agendas and issues that need to be in place before you can really affect and deliver for the poorest. So I think that's a very, very, very important point. So we'll move on to our last speaker, and then we'll have a very short time for questions, but we'll have some questions. So we've got Emma Wilson from IIED, who has been doing some research particularly on the role of the private sector, I believe, in delivering energy access.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for coming to our session. I'm going to briefly talk about a briefing paper that we produced especially for this event, with a focus on how the UN Sustainable Energy for All initiative can work with the private sector. I hope you have some understanding of what IIED is. We're hosting this event. We're an independent policy research institute. My colleague Ben Garside and I work for the Sustainable Markets Group, and we look at ways that enterprise can provide solutions to global development with an eye to environmental sustainability. And we are from the energy team, which is particularly looking at delivering energy access for the poorest. And we did a survey of private sector enterprises and NGOs that are involved in delivering energy access. We interviewed a total of 28 people from large and small business and from NGOs. And I have to say the interviews were carried out mostly by Rafaela Belanca, who's our colleague, formerly worked at Head-On, and Chris Hughes, who was interning with us at the time. And Rafaela and I have pulled together the research for this briefing, especially for this event, and it's going to be a discussion paper as we move forward with further engagement with the private sector and with other stakeholders. So what I wanted to do today, to keep it short, was to just give some of our key results, focusing in particular on the answer to this question: what can Sustainable Energy for All, the UN initiative, do to stimulate private sector involvement in sustainable energy access, especially for the poorest? And we weren't talking purely about reaching the poorest, because as you can tell from the presentations here, it's often that the private sector needs an awful lot of support, it needs to engage in partnerships, and often it's NGOs who are leading on delivering energy access to the very poorest. But we wanted to talk this through with the private sector themselves. So we came up with, when we clustered the potential areas that and actions that the Sustainable Energy for All initiative can do, we came up with 4 general areas. One is coordinating, the other is guiding, stimulating, and demonstrating. And in many ways, demonstrating came out most strongly. So what do we mean by coordinating? I think the letters are a bit small here, but I'll talk through it. Coordinating means linking different stakeholders. The Sustainable Energy for All initiative can provide a forum for different stakeholders to engage. That's entrepreneurs and investors, NGOs and business, private and public sectors. In particular, they can coordinate and perhaps educate donors who, according to this survey, frequently don't have much of an idea of how markets work. Also, there's a notion of coordinating information gathering, and setting up, in particular, one idea to set up country-focused information hubs to provide entrepreneurs, internationally and locally, to come together and partner. So information about local entrepreneurs would be extremely useful. And also other market analysis information, resource mapping, that kind of thing. This is something SE for All can stimulate. The next one is guiding. So SE for All is obviously a high-level initiative. It has influence with governments. So using the weight of this international initiative to influence governments to generate supportive policy and economic frameworks, possibly develop guidelines for policy directives, and promote certain incentives for decentralized renewable energy, such as we've already heard in the plenary today, fossil fuel subsidy reform, eliminating import taxes, tax benefits for local manufacturing, and feed-in tariffs. And the private sector interviewees had very clear ideas of what these incentives should be, and the idea is just so that these should be understood by governments, implemented, and so that the benefits to governments and to the public are understood effectively. So stimulating, how to stimulate. This relates mostly to finance. Finance was one of the biggest things, obviously, that was one of the biggest barriers for the private sector, particularly at the level of small-scale enterprises working internationally and small-scale enterprises locally. So what can SE4All do? Stimulate investment funds that are aimed at these difficult markets. So it's low-income markets. They have low rates of return, they have high risk, they have longer-term investments. That's not what a lot of investors want to invest in, especially even social investors, social impact investors. So how to stimulate the kinds of funds that might be willing to invest in these kinds of markets. Possibly SE4All can help to provide guarantees for private investment, encourage the public sector to adopt new technologies, support for research and education. We've already heard about capacity building being an important element. Demonstrating. This is where the whole notion of business models, delivery models, case studies is extremely important. And all of the business people that we spoke to were saying there aren't enough properly validated business models out there. The investment community doesn't understand what are working models, therefore they're reluctant to invest. So showcasing and validating demonstrably profitable business models is a good way to do this, and possibly SE4All can take the lead on some of these validation initiatives. This could also relate to developing standardized methods for measuring impact beyond profit for certain business initiatives. And also I mentioned financial institution capacity to really understand what these markets are, to understand where they can make money, and to understand how to invest. So, in short, more general things about SE4All and the private sector. Some of the people we spoke to didn't know anything about SE4All, although they're working in the area. And so they suggested that social media might be a good way to get access to some of the small and medium enterprises, both locally and internationally. SE4All really needs to find its institutional form, and I think over the next few weeks we're going to understand what it's going to be. It needs to include civil society, as we've heard a lot. And it also needs to be part of a wider strategy of tackling global poverty. We don't know whether it's going to become an SDG, but it really needs to be engaging with the SDGs as they develop. We identified a few relevant search areas, starting with market segmentation, which players, which stakeholders can best address the different markets, because a lot of the private sector were addressing emerging middle class markets. And then the NGOs and the private sector partnerships need to be developed to address the poorer markets, as we've already seen. So that's our briefing in summary, and it's available outside if people want to see it. I did want to talk briefly about an initiative that we are doing in partnership with Practical Action. This is Practical Action's market map. We've adapted it for energy delivery, and these are elements, you'll be able to see this later when we share the presentation slides. We're looking at the enabling environment, both social and political, looking at the delivery model, the implementation process, and we're currently working on this book. The heading is up at the top, and this is one example of really trying to analyse business models, trying to analyse how they work, and putting that information out and sharing it with people. And so that's the initiative that we're doing together with Practical Action. And you can actually pre-order it online on Amazon currently. We haven't finished it yet. And then I just want to leave that. Those are some quotes from the interviewees, so maybe you can just read them at leisure. We had some really interesting quotes. They're all in this paper if you want to take it home with you. But I thought for me, it was a very revealing exercise to do that survey. Just wondering if one of mine's up there, but we'll never know. Yes, thank you to anyone here who actually took part in the survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I did like your idea that the private sector effectively is hand-holding to enter this market. Is this working? Sort of. And it reinforced some of what Helen said in terms of that you need to get the policy right, the stakeholders right, the appropriate finance, getting all these things in place, not just one or other. So I think we've just got a short time. We'll overrun by 5 or 10 minutes, depending. And we'll move into questions, and I'm going to abuse my chair position because I think I slightly cut Neil short. Is if you can give us 1 or 2 minutes on your recommendations that come out of your work. You said from Mozambique, but also some of your other international experiences.
Absolutely. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, and in fact, it echoes some of the points that we've just heard from the other panelists, particularly in terms of the guidance that's required for private sector to enter into this sector. So, looking specifically at ownership, management, and governance of small-scale systems, a few issues that we have identified are that legal ownership does not always coincide specifically with perceived ownership. One can be present without the other, or they can both be present. And perceived ownership is often more important in terms of the system than the legal ownership, because it has greater impact on the managers and the users' sense of responsibility of whether it's going to survive as a business over the long term. Perceived ownership can certainly be enhanced if end users participate in the management, governance, and planning and decision making. Above and beyond that being an equitable stance, it also enhances the longevity of the business. It's positive if a clear link between perceived ownership and the recognition of benefits can be mainstreamed across it, so that there's a sense of shared value across all of the stakeholders. And also advisable if ownership is spread across as many stakeholders as possible. It improves accountability and improves management and reduces the propensity for mismanagement in the system. And finally, ownership models can mutate or be transferred over time from one set of stakeholders to another. We would certainly recommend that there should be as much flexibility as possible. In terms of management, a strong recommendation is that there needs to be some form of payment for enterprising and rigorous management, even at the smallest level systems, and you want people to do that professionally and well. Projects where management and governance structures follow a market-based approach tend to be more replicable and scalable, and therefore improve livelihoods over the long term. However, market-based approaches may not be immediately feasible, and certainly do require some sort of support. Profit margins may be extremely slim, and it may be very difficult to identify the right motivated and talented entrepreneurs to take on those kind of tasks. Business initiatives should not be afraid to follow an evolutionary approach in terms of management. So renewable energy systems might begin with a much more informal committee structure, and then that might progress to a formal cooperative structure in the future. And finally, governance. As I mentioned before, end user engagement is critical in terms of instilling a sense of responsibility in the system, but it stimulates all sorts of other benefits, such as gender empowerment, women feeling they're involved in the overall structure. And whatever ownership and management structure is chosen, governance and the transparency and accountability of governance is absolutely critical for the success of the system.
Thank you. Now, I'm glad I did that because having done research many years ago on this, very similar to at a local level. I would absolutely agree. That's our experience, and Helen's been nodding like that during that. So we'll just get a few minutes. I was wondering whether there's any questions from the floor. Happy to take a few. We do have a roving mic. Are you? Have we got any questions from the floor yet? I'll certainly get one here. We're slightly overrunning on this session, but we'll start the other one on time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I should make this question because, with the exception of the panelists from MAP, I think I feel very much a minority here because I feel that the assumption here is that energy is a commodity, and that and I can just quote two of the phrases that were said here. For instance, the paper by E presupposes that we need to stimulate the private sector involvement in sustainable energy access. And you say that market-based approach leads to more efficiency, replicability, and sustainability. And I think these are very much ideological assumptions that are not really based on empirical data. And I'm saying this not as a personal level. I work for the International Institute in Amsterdam, and we are part of a global research network, which which is the Municipal Services Project, which works on health, electricity, and water. And it is run by several universities, University of Queens in Canada, University of the Western Cape in South Africa, University of St. Simon in Bolivia, TNI in Amsterdam, focus on the Global South in Asia, the Red Vida from Latin America, which is a network of civic organizations working on water, and several other organizations. We collected a lot of data focused on alternatives to commodification of these three sectors that proves that there are alternatives to the market, and that we don't really need the market in order to secure access to water, electricity, and health. But here we are taking for granted that the market is very much needed. And since we work in water, electricity, and health, I feel very much like going back to 15 years ago when a similar discussion was taking place in the water sector. Now in the water sector, that discussion is very much in the past, because people are very much challenging this idea that every public service is a commodity. But in the energy sector, we are still very much behind. So I don't want to enter into a discussion. I just suggest you to look at our website, municipalserviceproject.org, where we have this book. It has been published by Routledge, etc. And there you can see multiples of cases that prove that there are alternatives to the market in Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
Okay, that's a challenge, and I think there are different experiences sat around this table, so I think we're reflecting the range of experiences, and market doesn't always mean not subsidised markets. I think particularly getting to the poorest people, that a subsidy or grant is and always has been. So it's interesting. I wonder if, I certainly will come to Sonia Mara, but I'm happy to take Emma first. Sonia Mara, she wants to prepare a response. But Emma, you wanted to?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that we don't believe that the market is the only way to get access to energy. But our survey was based on the fact that Sustainable Energy for All sees the private sector as being the main deliverer, the sort of filling in the gaps that government can't cover. And so therefore we wanted to do a survey of what the private sector, how it views Sustainable Energy for All, and also what they think Sustainable Energy for All can do. But I agree that there are alternatives to markets, but I think you can't sort of deny the fact that a lot of it is market-based. A lot of energy access is market-based. Energy is a commodity. A lot of energy, is basically sort of a commodity: oil, gas, electricity. So I think there are different ways, but we're not saying only market. We're just looking at.
Yeah, just to add, I agree with you not to open into debate. I know T and I's work well. I used to work with them in a different guise and a completely different life before this, when I worked in Latin America. In terms of Sustainable Energy for All, we're certainly one of the organisations that's saying that purely commercial response is not enough. And just looking at commercial business models and bankable projects now, it doesn't respond to the requirements of the poorest. So our stance that capacity building and some kind of subsidy or upfront investment is critical is quite different to the document that you see for Sustainable Energy for All. So there might be a variety of opinions here, but certainly we're in agreement that there needs to be multiple set of mechanisms to try and reach the poorest, and that simply isn't just investing into commercially viable projects now.
A energia hoje a nível mundial, ela está pensada por grandes corporações.
Energy na mundial, na global vision, I think just from the point of view of big corporations.
Corporações que não têm passaporte de entrar para um país e outro e que não têm pátria.
And they are a corporation that has not passport in order to go to a nation or another, and are not based in just a place.
E vão tentar transformar todas as alternativas energéticas em mercadoria.
So they will try to transform all the energetic alternatives in commodities.
Porque a energia hoje ela é central para o desenvolvimento do capital.
Because energy today is central, it is the main issue in order to develop the capitalism.
A energia serve hoje para a questão de consumo e de mercado.
Energy today is about consumption and market.
Por isso nós precisamos pressionar os governos e a sociedade para ter autonomia energética.
So we need to pressure governments and civil society in order to have energetic autonomy.
Para que as alternativas que nós vamos construir a partir de agora estejam voltados para as populações.
In order that the alternatives will are focused more in the population, not just in the...
E nós estamos com uma experiência dessas que apareceram no acampamento do futuro.
And this experience we have talked about the popular panels, solar panels that we are building, are in the Atero do Flamengo. We have exhibited one of them.
Então nós estamos tentando construir nas comunidades atingidas por barragens.
And we are trying to build this kind of energy in the communities of the affected people.
E trazendo também para conhecimento de mais pessoas que não imaginam que pode ter alternativas no controle social.
And bringing for more people that they don't know that they can have access and control of alternative of energy production.
You stimulated discussion there. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to wrap this session up now, but we will have a continuation of this discussion on delivery models. About 5 minutes, maybe 5 to 10, just to get the panel sorted. But I'd like to thank our panelists. I think it's been a fascinating. I just wish we have got a discussion similar to this, which will be in the main Rio Centro, certainly from an African perspective on the 19th. But I do hope that we can bring some of this real local delivery message to the people in the main summit hall, so they can see it's not just big corporates, it's actually about what you do at the local level. And I think that's what I've learned and heard from this situation. Thank you very much. So we'll thank you, panelists. And we'll change panel and move on with the next part of this session.